Hello! It's Randy here with another episode of The Product Experience. One of my favorite things about doing this podcast is that I sometimes get to do random follow up chats with people we've had on the show. And a few weeks ago, I was talking to one of them about his work coaching CEOs, and I thought, you know, this should be an episode. Because who amongst us has not wondered what the heck was going on in the head of their CEO? So, this week, Lily and I had an absolutely lovely and informative chat with returning champion Joe Leech, otherwise known as Mr. Joe, and he shared some amazing things that are absolute gems. And we're going to share them with you right now.
Joe, welcome back to the Product Experience podcast.
Oh, it's good to be back. Thanks both for having me.
It's very nice to see you again. And we obviously know you very well, but for anyone who doesn't know you, could you give our listeners a real quick intro to who you are and what you do in product, and also just a tiny little bit about your origin story? That would be amazing.
All right, let me start at the beginning. So my background's in tech. It's been about 20 years. I've been working in technology now. I started out in user experience, user research and design. Following that, I had a career briefly in and around product. And most recently, in what I do now is I'm a coach to CEOs. Some of them are tech company CEOs, but many of them are not. Some of them are startups, and many of them are larger organizations, a couple of publicly listed. So we coach CEOs from startups right through to large enterprises.
And we thought it'd be really interesting to chat to you today about your work, because
Mm.
obviously you have that really strong understanding of product with your background in product. But you now work with these, the top dogs, as it were, the CEOs and the founders of the world. So we wanted to pick your brains and find out what is going on in their brains and how
Yes.
can we work better with them. But before we get started, one of the things that you just touched on just there was like, founders and CEOs, and they're not always the same thing. So what's the difference, I guess, between a founder CEO and then like a different type of CEO, I guess, a scaling CEO or a
Really good
career
question.
CEO?
Yeah. Let me explain how I got here. That might help as well, because some of your listeners may have heard me on here before when I used to work in product and design. One of the reasons I'm a coach and I work with CEOs right now is one of the challenges I felt certainly early on in my career, and I've always worked more at the strategic end of technology and business, is in terms of working and planning towards strategy. I was always unsure and looking for more and greater impact, and wanted to chase and understand that why what I seemed to me logical decisions were not being made at the CEO level. I wanted to basically increase my impact. So I effectively followed my curiosity, which took me to the world of working with CEOs, basically because what I saw from down within the product world, within the design world, were decisions that I wouldn't have necessarily agreed with. And that fascinated me to understand, well, why is it, right? Why is it that these folks don't seem to make good decisions, or actually make what at the time don't seem like good decisions, but longer term actually are great decisions? I was very, very curious. And so I followed my nose to get to where I am now. And yeah, along the way, I've met two types really of CEOs: the founders, and I suppose a more traditional career CEO who's maybe they made their way up through the organization through product or through finance or through sales to sit in the CEO chair. And they are different. And if you work in product, maybe you've worked with both types of leader, maybe just one, maybe you've had frustrations with one and maybe you've not had frustrations with the other. I'm not sure, but they do differ. Founders, quite typically, they describe the business as being their baby, which is a little bit dangerous. Let's be clear, because it's not your child, right? You'd never in an exit or want to sell your child, but you'd happily sell your business. Whereas many founders treat it kind of as an extension of them. The business is an extension of them. And that's great, early on in a founder's career when it's an early stage startup, because all of their energy they're putting in is building a business which is all about them and the decisions and the choices that they make. As that business grows, that business becomes less of an overlap with them. Their identity has to change away from being, this is a business that I'm completely all over and making all the decisions in, to being a leader. And that requires quite a change in the individual to get there. And many founders really find that process hard to transition from being somebody who really deeply is invested and their identity is very much tied up with the business, to being more of a career CEO, which is you're leading it more from a business point of view than you're leading it from a very personal, being all over decision making and all elements of the business as a founder is. So your motivations are often slightly different, and the way you operate is often very different. And a big part of what I do, certainly with founders, is to help them operate more as leaders, to kind of effectively step back from that very entwined identity element of it. And with career focused CEOs, I help them be more visionary because, again, founders typically have a large vision for where they want to take that business. And for many CEOs, especially if they've worked their way up through their career to get to the point of being a CEO, that vision piece is often quite a challenge for them. And that can seem quite intimidating, if you've come from a finance or a product or a sales world, to create a vision of the business for the future. So effectively, what I do is learn from both types of CEOs and share those learnings on the other side.
Joe, we talked a couple of weeks ago, and you were telling me a bit about your process and the
Hmm.
work you do. And you described that when you start working with people, there's usually an arc, or different phases that people go through, and you have to recognize which phase they're in and guide them from one to the next. Can you just give us an overview? What are those phases?
Yeah. And if you're a leader or a manager right now, you're going to recognize these phases because these are very true for you. So the first one typically we work on is challenges that you're facing right now. So things that are maybe not necessarily on fire, but maybe things where you're like you've got a lot of plates spinning or lots of things are getting thrown at you all of the time. You're dealing with the urgent stuff as it happens in a business. Okay. It's very typical for a leader to be spending, often when I start working with them, a huge percentage of their time dealing with challenges as they present themselves. Maybe that's discord amongst their leadership team, or challenges from competitors, or things not happening, product not launching, sales not selling. There's always a challenge there, typically, that we spend our first 6 months or so working towards. Now, you'll probably recognize that if you're a leader right now yourself. In any new job that you start, typically you've got to get your head around the challenges before you can really get to grips with the bigger picture style of stuff. So typically the first 6 months is dealing with challenge. And a lot of the work that I do is help people with two sides of that. First, there's a mindset shift to really understand, well, what do I need to change about myself to deal with this challenge? But then also a skill set shift to really look at, well, what's going on here. And again, if you're an experienced leader, you know that all business challenges are people challenges. So a lot of the work that I do is offer people a skill set from I have a background in neuroscience and psychology. In essence, a skill set to really look at what's going on with the people dynamics in your organization. If you're the CEO, that's at all levels, from your board of directors to your C-suite to your senior leadership team, right down to the maybe tens of thousands of employees you've got. What's really going on with the people in your organization? Because typically, they're often the cause of some of your biggest challenges to the people. And then following the challenge, we move on to kind of the next part, which is really, I suppose, looking up and looking at the wider direction that you want to take the organization in. So the more strategic thinking. So where do you want to take the organization? Where does it need to go? What are more profound, bolder challenges that you need to make? So what are the big shifts that you need to make in your organization? Again, for CEO, that's fairly obvious what those can be, like acquisitions, divestitures, restructures, some of the bigger stuff. But similarly, if you're a product leader, 6 months into a job, you can have a strong idea about what the strategic challenges you are facing, and you can start to free up a bit of your time to really focus on the longer term strategy of really where you need to take that organization that you're responsible for. And then part three, really what we end up working with, and that strategic piece can take sort of 6 months or so to really put that into place, is legacy. What do you want to kind of leave behind? How do you want things to be different when you have moved on? Or again, for a CEO of an organization of tens of thousands of people, you can't be in the room with all the people all of the time. How are you known within that organization? What do people say about you when you're not in the room? How are you perceived? How do you act? How are you as an individual? And that really is the first place of sort of looking at your legacy. We look at succession planning, who's going to come after you. Because again, most CEOs, maybe they'll last 5-10 years in their role. They've got a certain length of stay that they're prepared to do. What does that legacy look like for them? And again, if you're the CEO of a large organization, what does legacy mean outside of that, really? How do you want to be remembered in the world? How do you want the press to see you? You really look at your longer term, the perceptions of you and how you'll be remembered, or how you want to operate in the world afterwards as well. And again, that's very relevant for any manager, right? Because typically on your career, you're going to be in the place you are for sort of between 2 and 5 years. How do you want to leave that place and that position after you've gone? So the arc is very common for most leaders as they move up the career ladder.
So Joe, just taking it all the way back to the beginning of that, when we were talking about firefighting, and they're kind of are solving those initial challenges that probably catalyze like bringing you into the business and the CEO going, I need some help. How much of that is related to product, or what can product people do when they notice a CEO in that sort of state, or even not just a CEO but like a senior leadership team,
Mhm.
if they're in this state of just like challenge constantly and not, they don't, as a product person, you might sense that they're not necessarily all over everything and on top of everything. Like what can you do?
Yeah, so it's worth thinking about I suppose the symptoms that you can see from that. So I often get CEOs will speak to me. They'll say things to me like, "I'm just too busy. I need to clone myself. I've got too many direct reports. I've got too much on my plate. I can't effectively enact a strategy." There's often something here that indicates that they're in essence really managing way too much, and that's the big challenge really here. Is often what you find is the folks who are new at CEOs, and a big part of what I do is working with first time CEOs, is they're not quite prepared for the volume of stuff that they have to do when they hit that level. So if you're moving up from product, for example, into CEO, you're managing way more and have to be, you can no longer rely on your expertise. You can no longer be a product expert and be a CEO, because you have to be, in essence, an expert across a number of fields, or really let go of the whole identity of being an expert at that level. So you can no longer know everything about all elements of your business. And so typically what you can see is for a CEO moving up from a CPO to a CEO and feeling that challenge, is they stay in product because that's safe. They understand it. They know what they're doing, and they'll stay in the place that they feel safe. So you may see that as a CEO who's come from the commercial side or financial side, they'll go to their place of safety. And what that can mean from you is it can feel a little like, not necessarily that they're ignoring you, but they don't quite engage with you as they do with other parts of the business, or they talk to you in a way that's more focused around the element of the business they've come from, so commercial or sales or something like that. So typically what you see is them going to a place of safety and not necessarily engaging with you as deeply as they could do in that situation. And you might feel that as being something on your part that you've done wrong. We're all humans, we go to that place, but they will struggle to really engage and want to engage with you at that level, right? They won't necessarily care too much about things like your roadmap or your structure or your strategy. They'll be on wanting to get things done. I need to get things done right now, right? I need you just to get on with this thing that I've said, because I've got lots of other things over here that I need to sort out. So typically what you'll see is them telling you a lot more what to do, right? And again, all of us in our career have worked with senior leadership that tell us what to do, right? And it may be not something that we agree with in that situation, but typically that's because they've got a lot going on elsewhere and just kind of want to tell you to get on with something. They can go back and do the things that they are needed to do, or the places that are needed within their business.
So is there anything you can do in that situation? Like what's
Yeah, there
your
is.
what can you do?
And so what typically we do, all of us do in that situation ourselves, is we go back to our superpower of the way we talk. And the way that I see it often, and the CEOs I talk to, is product people talk more about product, right? They get more obsessed with the roadmap. They get more obsessed with the strategy. They're like, we need a better vision. We need a better strategy for the business. They almost project back frustrations that they're feeling, that they're not getting what they need from the CEO. It's not unlike the relationship you might have with your kids, or when your kids, if you're not particularly ignoring them well, they start to play up slightly. I don't mean it's necessarily exactly what you're doing as a product person, but that's the temptation of what it can feel like when you're in that role, right? You go back to type, which is, we need to talk about the roadmap. I need to walk you through the strategy, all these sorts of things. So you go and you become over product in that situation. And the reality, the one thing you can do is, number one, say, what can I do for you? What do you need me to do? How can I help you? You really go into the world of trying to support them with their needs in terms of their leadership role, but trying to support them with the things that they need, rather than doing lots more product style stuff to try and support and fill that vacuum that CEO's maybe left.
There's going to be a big difference between working with someone who's coming in, who's new to the job, or even if they're an old hand at this, coming into a new organization and they've been brought in usually because there's a big challenge and something has
Mhm.
to change. Between that and then the second phase that you talked about of now they've got feel a little more comfortable, they're trying to put their strategy into place. Well, I'm going to ask you two questions about this. One, how do you, as a product person who isn't necessarily that close to the CEO, how do you recognize which phase they're in? And then how do you deal with them in this next phase when they're putting their strategy in place?
It's a really good question. It depends really on their point in their career. So for newer first-time CEOs, typically they come into a world of challenge, right? If you're taking over as a CEO, maybe it's been left well behind, left in a good state by the previous occupant of that role, or almost certainly you're going to want to make change and stamp your own mark on it anyway. So there's going to be challenge for the first 6 months anyway, regardless, because you're the number one person at the top. Maybe the C-suite team or the board is not exactly what you want it to be. There's going to be a world of challenge you need to get through to get some of the short-term things done that you need to do. So typically it can be time-based as well. But the second part of that is knowing which phase they're in, really. It depends really in terms of their experience and where they've come from. So if they are maybe a second or third time CEO and they've been brought into the company, they're going to come in with a lot of experience in terms of challenge. They're going to be able to know what the challenges are and want to get started very quickly on the strategy, right? It's exactly what they want to do. So you can often identify based on their previous experience which they're going to come into. And that's certainly how I do it. But the reality is you can just watch them operate to understand, right, the way they talk. If they're talking more strategically, you know which phase they're in, right? If they're talking more about challenges and getting things done and things that seem a lot more urgent, then they're almost certainly in that challenge phase. You can understand by the way they talk as to which of those two phases they're in. And let's be honest, all of us leaders are like that. And it's not a simple cut and dry as like on Friday I finish my challenge phase and Monday I start my strategy phase. These things come and they go at the ebbs and flows, right? There's always going to be fires and challenges and stuff that happens. It's your attitude towards them as they do happen that really sets you apart as a leader in these sorts of situations, right? If they absolutely rock your boat and phase you, then hey, maybe you need some more skill set and mindset shifts to be able to adapt to them. If there's like, okay, another day I've got another set of challenges, I can just deal with them. The challenges rarely go away. The ability to manage them and to prioritize them is the thing that really ultimately changes.
This episode is brought to you by Pendo, the only all-in-one product experience platform.
Do you find yourself bouncing around multiple tools to uncover what's happening inside your product?
In one simple platform, Pendo makes it easy to both answer critical questions about how users engage with your product and take action.
First, Pendo is built around product analytics, enabling you to deeply understand user behavior so you can make strategic optimizations.
Next, Pendo lets you deploy in-app guides that lead users through the actions that matter most.
Then, Pendo integrates user feedback so you can capture and analyze how people feel and what people want.
And a new thing in Pendo, session replays, a very cool way to experience your users' actual experiences.
There's a good reason over 10,000 companies use it today.
Visit pendo.io/podcast to create your free Pendo account today and try it yourself.
Want to take your product-led know-how a step further? Check out Pendo and Mind the Product's lineup of free certification courses led by product experts and designed to help you grow and advance in your career.
Learn more today at pendo.io/podcast.
And one of the things I find with CEOs kind of in that strategy, they're thinking quite strategically and they're not firefighting. They've got headspace to think about things and think things through. What I often find is that they'll come with an idea of this business is doing this thing, or I've heard this from someone, or this is how I did it last time. And
Yeah.
so there's a lot of preconceptions or there's a lot of outside influence. Quite often I find with people in that sort of situation because they're spending a lot of time checking that what we're doing in the business is, it aligns with like experiences of other people and stuff, which can be like a really helpful gauge of like what you're doing, but can also be like really, really annoying as a product person where you want to be led by data and customers. And, do you see that as well with the CEOs that you talk to and product people that you talk to? And what's the solution there? Are we allowed to just ignore them?
No, so the thing that seems to be going on here is it's a lonely position to be in leadership, right? Often it's just you. And the higher you get in the organization, the less peers you have. And when you hit the CEO role, in essence, it's the most lonely job in the organization. You don't have somebody necessarily that you can use to test your ideas upon. And in reality, that should be your senior leadership team. You should be able to do that with them, right? You should have that ability to trust them, and they should be able to complement you in the way that they work so that you can test ideas with them before you get to it. Any of us who've been in leadership before can identify that point where it feels very, very lonely, right? Where you feel the weight of the organization on your shoulders or the job on your shoulders. At that point, that's the point where you need to have somebody in the organization where you can share these challenges with, right? And that sounds to me like what I'm hearing here is a little bit of a reach out from a CEO for that, and certainly to a certain extent. The reality of what a CEO should be doing in those sorts of situations, and it's quite funny, one of the questions I get quite a lot with the CEOs that I work with, in fact, pretty much all of them at some point ask me, is they ask me the question, am I doing this right? Is this the right way to do this, right? And that's a really interesting place to be if you're that leader, right? Who can you ask that question to? So I think that that's a healthy sign that they're coming to you and asking you what you're working on, what you're doing, what your priorities are, what you think the organization should be. Is they're really coming to you to look for input for them to be able to set the vision for what the organization needs to be. So ultimately, for a CEO to be successful, they need a crispness of vision, right? They need the ability to be able to say exactly what it is that they want that organization to do or to be or to become. And that crispness of vision should then be able to drive the rest of the organization. And we've all worked with organizations that don't have that, right? Like they want to be the best, or they want to be number one, or something like that. But then you have the visionary leaders like, Steve Jobs or your Elon Musk, love them or hate them. They both had a very, very strong vision for where they wanted the organization to be. And the best CEOs out there will speak to and work to you, especially the people who are closest to customers and who are, especially in a technology organization and teams like product, who are in essence delivering the business value. They're going to look to you for the inputs for that particular vision. So always be open to have those sorts of conversations, because really what they're asking at that point is, what do you think the organization should be doing? What can you input to that? Because once they have that crispness of vision, everybody's aligned around that vision, then things start to happen and things start to change.
I totally get what you mean about it. The leadership roles being lonely. It's one of the reasons I started a community for CPOs.
There you go.
And it's fascinating when I get people together. What they talk about is, am I doing this right? It's, why aren't people giving me what I need, or what do I need to give to other people? So I'm curious. I mean, obviously, all CEOs are different, and we're not going to ask you to tell us the secret to dealing with all of them. But is there something common you see from the people you deal with, the people you coach, the people you talk to, in terms of the way they talk about their product teams? Is there something they need from them, or they expect, or they want, that they're just not getting? What is it we're missing? Because, we expect them, leadership, to have a vision and a mission and objectives, or for us to co-create that with them. And so many times it's either misunderstood or missing. Or so, how do we do this better?
I mean, it's a really good question. It's the $64,000 question, really. Is it linking that up?
It's way more than that.
I think what's interesting about that question is that question comes from all other parts of the organization as well, right? So if you're feeling that in product as a product leader, almost certainly your colleagues in sales are feeling the same thing as well, right? It's easy in sales to set targets like, we just need you to sell more, right? That's all we need you to do. And often you can hear the same thing in products. We just need you to build more. You can start to hear the same things there as well. So in a leadership role in an organization, especially if you're, for example, a CPO, my advice to you in that situation is to become friends with the other senior leaders in the organization. How can you complement the work of the sales team? How can you work with the commercial team better? How can you become friends with them? Because the reality is that's the best place to find a good friend, or a common friend with the same challenges as you, is in another part of the organization, but at the same level as you. And so in creating those bonds between you and other senior leaders, that's really where your strength can come from. Because again, one of the things that I work with, and why I work with my CEOs, now I don't work with all CEOs, right? I can't work with all of them. And I have a very certain fit criteria of the CEOs that I want to work with. And that's really twofold. Number one, they want to change. And number two, they really want to do the best possible job they can do. Really, that's my criteria. And so the CEOs that I want to work with are coming into it looking for ways that they can be better in terms of what they do. So as a product leader, you can help them by understanding how they can work better with you. Maybe they'll ask you that. Maybe you can tell them, here's what would be really helpful for me to be able to work better for you. Is to be able to have that crisp message yourself about how you want to work with the CEO, right? What do you want it to be like in the relationship you have with that CEO? If you can project that to them and they can do the same back to you, at some point there's going to be a fit there where you can start to create a lot better. Work together, you can sort of start to work a lot better. What I find where the mismatch comes is where folks are not very clear on what they want and what they need, and are expecting the other side to kind of fill in the gaps, right? They've got expectations of the CEO. Well, in the meeting with the CEO, they're going to tell me exactly what they want here. No, the reality is it's a two-way street. You need to say what you want, and they'll respond to that by saying what they want and they need as well. It's absolutely the way to do it. So asking for support and help from your CEO and asking for what you need is possibly the best way to be. And the question you've got about how to get better, the biggest challenge I see, and I'll be honest, working with the CEOs that I work with about product and product teams generally, is they are too disconnected from the commercial side of the organization. They are too focused on roadmap, on shipping, on features. And I know how that's going to sound to a certain extent, but what I hear from the CEOs is they don't have the commercial understanding or acumen to work closely enough with the commercial organization to really deliver what the commercial side of the organization needs. So that's often the biggest complaint that I see, is they are slightly disconnected from the commercial realities of the business and of the organization as a whole.
I think that's really interesting, and I've seen it come up quite a few times recently on like LinkedIn chats or WhatsApp groups and stuff, with people are saying there's still like a real gap in the commercial acumen of product managers, like currently, and where they should be. And that's a really, I think it's quite a difficult skill to develop as a product manager, because it's not necessarily also where people expect you to have experience. So what can product people do in order to level up their commercial awareness and understanding?
So the first thing they can do is really follow their curiosity about the commercial side of the organization. So really truly understand how the organization makes money. Now that you can translate as being things like, well, how much is the pricing on the pricing page? But it's much deeper than that. The reality is you understanding at a deep level how the commercial team operate. So if you're working in the SaaS world, absolutely right, you need to know how the salespeople sell. Okay, because the way that they sell is not necessarily how people use the product. I know that's a very straightforward thing that we all kind of know, but the reality is you have to have a deep understanding of how salespeople operate and how they work. And that's what's going to drive you forward in any product organization. It's really truly understanding the economics of the organization. In the more B2C world, that's again understanding those economics at scale, really. That's really understanding how marketing and top of funnel and that element of lead generation works or customer generation works. So really understanding where your customers are coming from and what your customers' needs are, but with a commercial focus on. Because the reality of most customers, when they're choosing or selecting a product or something to deliver something for them, that's very, very different often from when they're using the product. They're wearing a different hat and have got a different set of criteria when they're choosing something from when they're using something. So the reality is understanding those two important differences and really following a deep curiosity with the folks in the commercial side of the organization. And that means building strong links with them.
I guess in that sense, it's very similar to just developing any other skill or knowledge in any other area of tech or marketing or customer service
Mhm.
or whatever it is. It's just like you say, that curiosity, asking questions, wanting to understand things, not at the surface level, but at that next level down, that deeper level. One of the things I always do when I go and work in a new business is speak to the CFO or the finance director and go, show me the financial model. Like, I want to understand all the inputs and the levers and all the assumptions that you're making. And I think it does like just give you such a sort of clear perspective of like that the commercial side of the business.
And I think what product people are really great at is abstracting layers up from that. So often what you find with product people is you're amazing at taking, understanding and abstracting it 10 layers up to be, a feature on a roadmap, for example. And the reality is in doing that abstraction, you can lose touch with the reality of what the actual situation is. So it's regrounding yourself in that commercial element of the business is really going to drive you forward. And from a career point of view, which do you think is going to make you more successful as a product person?
Mm.
Understanding how your organization operates commercially, or getting really great at roadmaps, right? Which one's going to serve you better longer term? It's an obvious answer when you think about it like that. But the reality is we tend to choose more safer product skills for us to come up with, because embedding ourselves or getting, understanding the sales team is quite a scary prospect for us. Because often, we speak in very different ways. If you look at the commercial organization, they'll often say the same thing quite a few times in a conversation. They'll even change it. They'll even contradict themselves. Salespeople will contradict themselves in a whole conversation. I've been with tech people who find that deeply frustrating, right? They'll say things to me like, I told the sales team 6 months ago that feature wasn't happening, and they've forgotten about it. The reality is the two sides of the organization operate differently. Salespeople are all about conversation, relationships, empathy, repeating conversations, talking to people. The tech folks were all about making something tangible, real, with levels of abstraction, taking away context. We have different skill sets that make us suit and work in very, very different ways. And when those two skill sets meet, challenges can come up because, salespeople like to talk a lot and tech people like to write things down and make proper lists about process, right? Very black and white. And those things don't go very well together. If you've worked in organizations, you know that sales folks are not great at running processes because they're not wired that way. That's not the way they work. That's not the skill set that's going to make them successful. And the same is true. So you've got to have a deep understanding and appreciation for how the other folks operate. Because the big challenge I see about, certainly from CPOs or product people trying to make that leap up from a CPO into the leadership CEO role, that's the big thing that holds them back, is that deep commercial understanding of the organization and how it works.
So for those people that are thinking, the CEO is the role that they're ultimately aiming for, obviously you've just talked about commercial awareness, but what else can help you get ready for that step from product leader into CEO?
I think the biggest thing you can do is let go of your subject matter experience. So often in any element of the organization, financial, sales, product, marketing, you kind of, you hold on tightly to that subject matter experience that you've got. And that can be really great to get you where you are. But the reality is, to make that next step, you need to move beyond that. And that actual subject matter experience can hold you back because that's somewhere that's safe for you and you'll always want to go to. So the reality is to be at that top level, you have to have a strong understanding of all elements of the business, right? All parts of how the business operates, not just a pure focus on one. Because the challenge you're going to face when you get to that level is you'll go to your safe place, which is, like, for example, just working in product. And that's not going to help you or the organization to push your career forward anyway. And it will actually hold you back, during the interview process all the way through. So the reality of if you want to prepare yourself for the top, is you need to get broader in your skill set. And that's much more in the world of leadership than it is to be a subject matter expert. And many of us, certainly in product, pride ourselves on the fact that we are subject matter experts or have been subject matter experts in the past. And the reality is that can count against you when you make that step up.
Do you think it's fair to say that you'll never be fully ready, or you'll never know how ready you are and you kind of actually just need to do the job?
Yeah. I mean, that's a really great way to talk about it, Lily. It's like being a parent. If any of you have been a parent, right? None of us are ever ready to be a parent. Okay. You can't comprehend the complexity of the world that you're entering. And the reality is the same is true of being a CEO, right? The level of complexity at that level is never going to, you're never going to be wholly prepared for it. The only way you can really do it is by doing it, right? There's no sort of CEO school you can go to that's going to get you to that point when you're there. There are certain jobs at the C-suite that will get you closer to that. Typically, that's in and around the world of being a CFO. But the reality is not, there's very little that can before you, in essence, get there. Which is why, looping back to the first question that we talked about around founders, which is why founders find it particularly challenging, because often they're in an earlier place in their career, or they've excelled in other parts of the stuff they've done before, and then they are thrust into that world of being a leader, maybe way early in their career than a career-based CEO would be. So yeah, it can be a real shock for you at that point when you get there, because you can't really comprehend the challenge of what you're undertaking. And that can be an amazing challenge at the same time, but it can equally be quite scary and intimidating when the first few weeks in that particular role.
Joe, that is fantastic. I will say this: give the same advice to potential podcast guests. You won't know that you're a good podcast guest until you try it. So if you've got something in you, get in touch. Let us know. We love getting pitches from people. Joe, thank you again so much. This has been absolutely brilliant.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. The Product Experience hosts are me, Lily Smith, host by night and Chief Product Officer by day.
And me, Randy Silver, also host by night. And I spend my days working with product and leadership teams, helping their teams to do amazing work.
Luran Pratt is our producer and Luke Smith is our editor.
And our theme music is from product community legend Arnie Kittler's band, POW. Thanks to them for letting us use their track.